Welcome to In Conversation with writer and editor Sheila Bender, discussions on the writing life, a monthly chat with writers, publishers, and those who support the literary arts. Today, Sheila is interviewing Robert Komishane.
Hello, this is Sheila Bender, talking today from the studios at KPTZ. I am interviewing Robert Komishane about his interest and performances in rap. Robert moved to Port Townsend 13 years ago from Elizabeth, New Jersey. He calls himself a third-generation Elizabethan who has been displaced. He's listened all his life to and loved every kind of music, and since high school, he's been writing poetry. 4.5 years ago, he combined both of those interests and became a rapper in middle age. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Sheila.
I can see from some of the information you've given me that your interests in life are vast. Here in Port Townsend, you love to walk, you love to write and draw and doodle and exercise, and you love the local restaurants. One of the most local of them, the Boiler Room, is a place where I think you've learned a lot about rap. So maybe we should start today with your connection to the Boiler Room and that learning.
Okay, well, when I decided to try to learn to rap 4.5 years ago, I had been at the Boiler Room already, but I really consulted the young people there, the teenagers and early 20s who knew a lot about it. I didn't know anything at all. And they helped me a lot. They recommended rappers I could listen to. They listened to my raps and gave me a lot of good feedback about certain things, especially things that I needed help with, like making my delivery more emphatic because my voice is usually pretty soft, and about keeping on the beat, very important in rapping, and other things.
So the Boiler Room is a place in town here in Port Townsend where mostly younger people gather. And you had the courage as an older person to go in there and start speaking about rap, which would be more in their province than in an older person's province. Did that feel funny?
No, it didn't. They're very welcoming there. And also, when I started doing it, a couple of the young men said they were kind of surprised. What got you interested in our poetry, our music? And I told them, well, I've published poetry over the years, and when I first started hearing the really good rappers, I think they're up with some of the best poets I've heard in their linguistic skills, their being able to do it with music especially, their lyrical dexterity and their rhyming.
So they were impressed that you were impressed.
Yes.
And that opened the door for them to be forthcoming about help in what you needed to know about rap, I take it.
Yes.
So how soon after you started creating your own raps did you start performing them?
Well, I think I started right away at the Boiler Room. Just in, there was a poetry class once a week, a group, and I did some there. That was the earliest that I did.
And they were well received?
They were, even though they were very rudimentary. They just loved the idea that this elderly guy was trying to do this, and they had a sense of humor about it too.
And so that was about 4.5 years ago.
Yes.
And so where has your performance of rap taken you today?
Well, I've done a few over the years, not really very many. I did a couple at the Boiler Room at performances. I did two professional rappers a few years ago came to the American Legion Hall, and I did a couple there to introduce them. And I also, when I was writing more political ones, I did one at the courthouse. It was a protest over home foreclosures.
Robert, this brings up a really important aspect of rap, and you said political ones. Maybe this is the time for you to tell us a little bit more about what rap is and its place in the cultural climate today.
Well, if I could go back a little briefly on the history, well, it actually started in the South Bronx in the 1970s, I think about the mid-1970s, and rap itself was not prominent. Where it started was really all-night dance parties, and the main person was the DJ who would play the music and also do something called scratching, where they get two turntables of records and pick out the prominent drum beats and just turn them and go back and forth, so that was repeated. And there was also breakdancing was another big element, and also graffiti art.
How did the graffiti art work into it?
Well, I think they would do it on the walls there. And there were other elements, but the MC, all the MC usually did was give little comments about what was going on and things like that. But gradually they began to rhyme, and then it developed into rapping, which basically has been extracted mostly. Hip-hop was really a lifestyle, a social movement in the Bronx. And what we hear now is rap. That's sort of the difference between rapping as a part of hip-hop.
I see. So when we hear it, most of us hear it, I guess, on the air through major radio stations. Does it exist only there, or can we hear some of the more local versions of rap easily on the air? Are there sources where we can find that?
Before I say locally, let me say something very big with me is that most of what you hear on the radio, the mainstream pop stuff, I think is very low skill level. They talk about pretty inconsequential things, and they make a lot of money and they become very well known. But the ones that I listen to, so-called underground rap, especially ones called conscious rap, address very serious socio-political issues. They've given great encouragement to kids in the ghettos to get out of the drug life, the gangster life, and to try to break away from that. And all around the world, every oppressed people, disenfranchised people, especially young people, have taken up rapping. So I listen to those. You can find them on YouTube, and maybe afterwards I can give a few that I like.
Well, you could interject one right now. Is there a particular one that comes to mind?
Okay, well, my favorite from the beginning has been a rapper from Brooklyn, New York, Talib Kweli.
Do you want to spell that for us?
TalibKweli. And you can find some of his songs on YouTube, a lot of them, actually.
And what is he rapping about?
Well, he's usually known as a, quote, conscious rapper. He writes about the pain growing up in the ghetto, but also encouragement to somehow, as he has, to overcome it by either becoming rappers or by becoming conscious and trying to do something positive for people themselves and their fellows.
So do you feel, I know that you're from New Jersey, probably not from the ghetto in Elizabeth. I grew up in New Jersey myself. Do you think there's a heart connection for you between their topics and yours, or your interest in rap?
Yes, I do. I've always felt strongly about various oppressions and felt connected to and sympathetic with things like that. And also just the thing that got me interested in trying to rap in the beginning was just hearing the beautiful linguistic skills, the beat, the instrumentation. I just feel like a very deep heart connection with those people doing that.
So you brought some of that culture to more of us in Port Townsend. You mentioned rapping at the courthouse during a demonstration about problems with mortgages and people's homes being reclaimed by the banks. Have you written some other political ones?
Well, one of the first ones I wrote was called What's News, and that ranged widely around corporate greed and the oppression of immigrants that was going on in the Southwest and other things like that. But I have, in the last year, I've kind of switched. I've been writing much more kind of personal, humorous ones, bringing in more metaphor and, things like that.
So your skill with poetry is you're increasingly putting that into your rap. So that sounds to me like you've had experience now, learned from the younger people, learned from your experience listening to rap about the style and the linguistic qualities of rap, and now you're feeling perhaps more free to bring in your poetry background and combine the two?
Yes. In the beginning, what I was doing for a while, I called it kind of a hybrid between narrative poetry and rap. I wasn't really getting the flow, as I call it, of real rapping, and I still feel I'm just barely approaching that.
That would be an interesting thing to talk more about. What is the flow, and how is it different than other kinds of written verse?
Well, I've done a lot of research on Wikipedia. It was hard for me to express that, but I'll try to, read a few quotes that
Sure.
I think might be easier. Here's something. One thing about flow is sort of the central rules about rapping is there have to be 4 emphasized syllables to every bar of music. Now, also keeping on the beat, the emphasized syllables in the voice have to keep on the emphasized syllables in the music, the beat. In so-called old school rap, which started in the mid-'70s, went to about the mid-'80s, it was pretty simple, mostly end rhymes, not too many syllables in between the stressed syllables. But what started in around 1986 and went into the 90s and continuing was having a much more complex rhyming, having often many more syllables in between the stressed ones. And basically the flow is the rhythm and rhyming as they interact in the song. That's one way I could express it.
That's a good explanation. It all sounds complicated for the person creating the rap. So do you think for many rappers it becomes a very intuitive way of thinking when they're writing? And has that happened for you as you've gotten more experience?
Well, I think the original rappers, and a lot of them who grew up in the inner cities, their whole tradition from the blues, from jazz, from the African griots, from the so-called playing the dozens, was much more oral poetry. And with the music, and I think most of them probably, it was very at home for them. Like when I started writing free verse poetry in the early 70s, I read a lot of it. That was my natural flow. It's much more difficult for me to get. I have to really study and learn because it's not a natural flow for me.
And yet it's very interesting and important to you, so I think, and challenging. So it sounds to me like you've really enjoyed growing in that direction.
Oh, I have very much, because it's more challenging. Over 40, 50 years of writing free verse poetry, I almost never had to revise anything. It flowed out of me easily. And the rap, I have to work and revise, and I like that. It's sort of more to me like practicing a craft. Just to see myself approach the rappers that I really wanted to emulate, that I admire so much, even to get little bits of their rhyming, their flow, feels really good to me because I really do respect and admire them so much.
Well, we're going to take a minute here to listen to you rap. You want to tell us anything about the one that you're going to perform for us before we do it?
Okay, this is a single verse rap. Usually there's 2 or more verses with choruses in between, but this is a single verse one. It's the most recent one I've done, called My Story. And I think for me, it's the one that's come closest to getting even near the sound that I heard that I wanted to try to emulate. And I want to say also that I've worked in town with DJs. One, if I can mention his name, Caleb Lowry, a young man who's helped me a lot, and he's done the beats. But this one, I used the recorded beat of one of the most famous rappers from the 90s, Tupac, in a song called Life Goes On. And so this is the beat, the instrumental you'll hear that I wrote the rap to and I rap to.
Is that something that rappers do, or is that your idea to take a beat from a rapper and then put your words there?
Some rappers when they make a CD, they also make an accompanying CD with just the beats instrumental for people to practice to. But when rappers are professionals, they're selling their work, I don't think it's considered moral or even legal to use others' beats. They have their own DJs.
Uh-huh. The idea of sharing beats to create more raps is really interesting, and it seems like there really is a very strong culture around this particular genre.
There is a very strong culture, yes.
Start the beat, and it sounds to me like the beat goes on, and you can chime in when you're ready.
What you're aspiring to can't be defining you, 'cause life's lots more than anything you do. Who you really are is that one who grew like roots out of the ground toward a sky-high sound, singing your songs, what you've been through. Now you're free to go where destiny leads you to. How I got over? I don't know. It's over now. I'm in the clover now. You might think, sober now? Not a drinker. Spent my days in the stark madhouse. Sank down to the depths. Yeah, I almost drowned like a fading flower dying back to the ground. Panic-stricken gravity pulled me down, but don't need to dwell in the terrorhood no more. Sure, my life was hell, but I closed the door on that house of pain filled with the dinosaurs, screaming down the halls like, what's it for? Emerge, not submerged like I was before. Saw a light led me up from the ocean floor. Carpe diem, like they say, I seized the day. Wasn't easy, man. Still took years of flames, flickering, floundering, such a shame. I sank down deep like I had feet of clay, but in time the game resumed after rain delay. Now at last I can say I reached a better day.
This is KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend. In case you have just joined us, you are listening to Sheila Bender and Discussions on the Writing Life. Today, Sheila is interviewing Robert Komishane.
That was wonderful, and as I moved to the beat here in the studio, and I saw our producer doing that too, I had the realization that rap reaches us in our bodies so that the words are coming through our ears, we're hearing the story, but we're digesting it through our very cells, which we would hope would happen in poetry too, but rap sort of just drives it in there. Very, very wonderful experience to listen to you.
Thank you.
Want to tell us anything about your experience writing that particular rap, which I want to remind listeners you said comes closest to what you heard as you were hoping. What got on the page was close to what you were hearing in your inside.
Yes. Well, I actually started, I don't even remember how the idea started. I started writing, but then after a short time, I wanted to find a beat that I could really write to, continue, and also hear. Sometimes when I write without the beat, I put on a beat, it doesn't work at all. It doesn't fit the beat. So I found this song, which is one of my favorite songs. You can find it on YouTube by Tupac called Life Goes On. And I found it worked, and he did have an instrumental. So that's when I started really working and revising it to just exactly fit that instrumental beat.
So is that something you'll do now, is write without a beat, then revise to a beat?
Well, both ways. If something starts coming to me and I don't have time or I'm not near to find something, I'll write it and then work a lot when I find the right beat. But sometimes it is when I'm listening to a beat that I like. Often when I listen to rappers go for a long time or beats, the rhythm, the rhyming sort of gets into me, and that generates my working on it.
I noticed when we were talking before you performed that you say DJ, and most of us, I think, say DJs. And I'm wondering if that's part of the culture, part of how you hear the term.
I'm not sure what you mean.
It might not be important even, but I have noticed in listening to some raps, knowing you were coming to the studio, I've been actually doing a little bit of homework and listening. Because of the stressed syllables that you mentioned, I noticed that there's different inflection in the way they say words to meet that stress in those beats. So I was just wondering if DJ versus DJ was one of those.
Well, I wasn't conscious I was doing it, but when you bring that up, that's a good thing because the stresses, the pronunciation in rap is not necessarily the way it would be in speaking or even written poetry. It's often very different to fit in with getting on the beat, to having a flow that's interesting. So that's something that's very true.
And that's part of the linguistic aspect that you were talking about earlier.
Yes, the great skill and dexterity, and how it's so different from writing poetry or even singing songs in music. It's not poetry put to music, and it's not singing in the way we usually think of it. It's a genre completely separate unto itself with its own rules and skills.
Are there any lines in the piece that you just performed for us that have an example of saying something differently than we would say it normally?
Okay, let me look here. Well, I vary. Like, I used to have each line was the same beat, and I vary. Like, for instance, in this one, now you're free to go where destiny leads you to. How I got over? I don't know. It's over now. I'm in the clover now. You might think sober now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that example. What would you like to say to anyone who might get sparked with an interest in creating some rap after they hear our conversation today?
Well, I think mainly to listen, and I could suggest some others to listen to.
Okay, so you did suggest one earlier and spelled it, and sure, a few more would be great.
Okay, well, Tupac, who I said was one of the great ones from the so-called golden age of rap in the late 80s through the mid-90s, who I like. Another young Canadian named Shad, S-H-A-D. A couple of women rappers. There haven't been that many, but one from Detroit called Invincible, who's also a community activist. Another more recent one called Alyssa Marie, who her first album has been out. Two Seattle groups, Common Market and Blue Scholars, I like a lot. One who was really instrumental in switching from the old school to the new flow in 1986 and has a recent album in the last few years, Rakim. He's a good example of the old and then the new. Well, one who's pretty strong, very strong politically, and he has some rough language if that would put you off, but his name is Immortal Technique. And those are a few.
Thank you. That's quite a few, especially for those of us beginning to listen. We have a lot to look up. Anything else you want to tell us about rap?
As an example of the ones that I heard who I really think have a beautiful flow and rhyming, just a few lines from a few of the ones I like the best. Well, Talib Kweli, in his song I Try from his album The Beautiful Struggle, has these lines. Life is a beautiful struggle. People search through the rubble for a suitable hustle. Some people using the noodle, some people using the muscle. Some people put it all together, make it fit like a puzzle. And then a couple lines from Shad, his song Rose Garden. Those with eyes should act like it, to help the sightless seeking the light switch to see in the night with, we leading the lifeless. And then Immortal Technique in his song The Dominant Species. He has a chorus, they call it sometimes battling, as if he's putting down another rapper. It goes like this. I drop knowledge so heavy it leaves the world unbalanced. Exterminate the spiritual force of all that challenge. I'm the lyrical apocalypse that crumbles the granite, replacing you as the dominant species on the planet. And that was also meant politically and racially and as well as personally. And that's one of my favorite songs, actually.
I'm very impressed with your ability to recite these in beat. This is an accomplishment. I know that as a poet, my teachers always said it was important to recite, to memorize and recite. It seems to me quite another layer to memorize and recite the beat as well, and the stresses.
Well, one of the hardest things for me is to memorize my raps. It takes me a long time, and I remember as little fragments of ones I liked. But that is very difficult for me. And again, a lot of the young kids here, they hear something like I used to hear Dylan songs a few times. I could say a lot of the lyrics. They hear these raps, some of them so lightning fast I can't even make out what's being said, and they can memorize them. And of course, the rappers some of them have 20, 30, 40 more songs, and they have memorized all of them.
That makes me want to ask you the question about slam poetry. Are you familiar with it?
A little bit, yeah.
Do you see any similarities or...
Yeah, there is. Slam poetry also is a verbal oral form, and often the idea of the battle of competition, and also the use of language, the very great linguistic dexterity, rhyming. Yeah, I see a lot of similarities. In fact, some of the rappers are also slam poets.
And in slam poetry, there really is a competition going on.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So it seems to me that maybe poetry itself is getting back to its roots as an oral tradition. We've had years and years and years of quietly picking up books and reading the words of poets surrounded by a lot of white space. And now it seems that the way poetry has infiltrated our culture in a more mass way or popular culture way is through oral presentation. Rap, slam.
Yeah, well, of course, early, like the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed completely, not written down at all, and passed on for maybe generations by memorization. And I think it's true that through rap, maybe it's having a more general, wider appeal and influence of trying to bring people back to, as you say, the original feeling and performance and even composition of poetry was an oral form.
Right. And so before we close our conversation today, I want to be sure to ask you if you have upcoming performances and if you're preparing for them.
Well, as I said, I haven't performed much, especially this last year. And I have 4 songs this year I like a lot. I'm working on another. And if I could work on them and memorize them and maybe make a demo CD and perform, a couple of them have other people on them. So if they're not there to perform, what my computer tech Jeff did, he left blank space for my lines. He put the others' lines, and I have to do it so well that I can rap to get exactly to the place where they're going to come in on recording. So it could take me a while, but I think I might work on that.
Well, this seems like a new idea to you, though, to have more than just your voice in a rap.
Yes, it's the first time this year. The previous 3 ones I did before this one do have other people on them.
So how did you come across that idea, and what made you interested in including that kind of work?
Well, a lot of rappers do that. They'll have, they call featured rappers who will come in, or they'll do lines together, which I do on in the midst of one of my songs. And they'll also often have like background singers, usually women singers who do the choruses. And so it's very collaborative. And another thing with rap is one of the most popular things. Well, freestyling is making up off the top of your head. And often they'll do something called a cipher, where they'll get in literally in a circle, and one will freestyle, and the next one will take off from that one, the suggested things, and completely off the top of the head and working together like that. I did a little of that, at the Boiler Room with a few of my friends.
I was just going to ask you if you still connect with the Boiler Room.
Well, the last year I haven't been there. I used to go every week to the open mic, but I'll probably be going back, especially if I want to start performing my raps. It's just a good place to be for me. I would say for any people, it doesn't matter what age, it's a good place to hang out.
If you're in Port Townsend, and if you're not in Port Townsend and you happen to be listening to us streaming in another location, you might want some advice from Robert on where to connect with the rapping community and not feel too self-conscious about age if you're not a younger person. Do you have any ideas?
Well, I say the Boiler Room is one. Around here, it's, some of the people I know, the young people, perform sometimes at the Roadhouse out of town, and I'm trying to think of other places. There's not that much that I know about here, actually.
Well, it sounds to me, though, that the main lesson from what you're telling us is don't feel shy. If you respect the work and you come to it with that respect, the people who are doing the work are going to be open to you, including you, and guiding you a little bit. Would that be fair to say, you think?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and if anybody would want to get in touch with me to talk about these things or get suggestions on songs to listen to, I'd be glad to. I could give my email if you want me to do that. Or okay, well, it's all lowercase letters, my name, one word, Robert, and I'll spell my last name. It's Komishane, but it's K-O-M as in Mark, I-S-H-A-N as in Norman, E. Robert Komishane at gmail.com.
Robert, thank you so much for that information and for your willingness to talk to other people. It's always nice as you're getting older to stay current with what's happening. So thank you so much for being in the studio and for filling us in on this genre, which is new to many of us.
Well, thank you, Sheila. I really had fun doing this. I appreciate it, and I appreciate very much KPTZ for doing these things. And I listen a lot. I did write a little rhyme for a station break type of thing, if I could do that.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. It did start out as a freestyle, and I worked at it. Here's a freestyle on the KPTZ. Eclectic, authentic, whenever I listen, really frees me. Teaching about the world came from radio, not the TV. Learn life lessons of which the essence will never leave me.
Thank you.
You've been listening to In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on the writing life. If you have a writing challenge, author, or question you'd like us to include in future conversations, email us at sbender@writingitreal.com. Producer, sound engineer, and editor Sheila Kalav, executive producer Larry Stein, and announcer Kurt Vanderslice. You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend.